What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Let's Slam podcast. I'm your host, Bajo, and today we are going to be talking about something that needs much discussion. I really want to talk about Spider-Man No Way Home, my favorite superhero of all time, and the reason why that is because first of all, his suit's awesome. His superpowers are cool, and who doesn't want to swing around like a spider? When Stan Lee created Spider-Man with Jack Kirby, Peter Parker was intended to be relatable to the average kid. He's bullied in school, he's poor, but despite all of that, he carries on. He's not some rich playboy, billionaire philanthropist, or hailed from a long line of magic wielders. He was just a genius child who happened to be bitten by a radioactive spider on accident. So going into Spider-Man No Way Home and seeing the trailer, everybody went crazy about it. Because, you saw Dr. Otto Octavius again after, how many years has it been? Almost 20 years, I think. And seeing the return of old Spider-Man villains from past movies led to a lot of rumors about this movie. I mean, come on. You can't have Spider-Man No Way Home with the old villains and not have the old Spider-Mans. So I think, it was already pretty obvious that the old Spider-Mans would be in this movie. I had some expectations, obviously, to see the Spider-Mans. That was the first, that was the first obvious expectation that I had. And I expected it to be an amazing movie. I wasn't expecting to be disappointed or anything because I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt before I watched it, of course. So you can't really knock it until you've seen it. The fight scenes, I was expecting really good fight scenes. They showed a clip on YouTube of when he was fighting Dr. Octopus on the highway. That was like a 1 minute clip or something. That was pretty cool. So I'm like, this looks dope. I can't wait for this to come out. And, the fight scenes were brutal as fuck. Especially the fights between Tom Holland's Peter Parker and the Green Goblin. That hallway fight after the Green Goblin hurt Aunt May. And Peter got pissed off and started to beat the shit out of the Green Goblin. But the thing that's scary about the Green Goblin is that he's so strong that he's taking these hits like they're nothing. And Tom Holland's punching him as hard as he can out of anger. Green Goblin just laughs at him. And they continue the hallway fight scene. You could literally see the power in every single punch that Tom Holland's Spider-Man threw during that fight. You could really see the strength and just really how hard they were going at it. An interesting thing about this hallway fight scene, or this apartment complex fight scene, is that the directors actually got some fight moves from the PS4 Spider-Man video game, which I do have, and that game's absolutely amazing. So one of these moves, for example, is when Peter Parker and the Green Goblin, they are fighting on the patios or the decks or whatever of the apartments, and the Green Goblin's on the ground. Spider-Man jumps up, double webs him while he's in the air, and uses his webs to sling himself downwards and step on the Green Goblin to fall down even lower on the apartment floors. So that was a move that was from Spider-Man, PS4. And the thing about this fight is that if history has anything to teach us, you don't mess with Aunt May, because Spider-Man will come after you. An example of that is during The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 542. This issue of The Amazing Spider-Man took place directly after the Civil War happened between the superheroes, and just like in the movies with Captain America Civil War, one side was Captain America, one side was Iron Man. Peter initially sided with Iron Man, and that's how Peter gets his Iron Spider suit in the comic books. What makes Peter change his mind about siding with Iron Man and being pro-SRA, which is an acronym for the Superhero Registration Act, is that during a fight between between Captain America and Iron Man's superhero teams, Iron Man's team was actually beating Captain America's team. Iron Man actually made a clone of Thor that he brings to that fight. Clone Thor proceeds to kill Goliath, who was on Captain America's side. And Spider-Man saw this. He realized that this might not be a fight worth fighting, as lives are now at stake, and they've lost their first life during the battles between the superheroes. When Peter Parker was still on Iron Man's side, he actually revealed his identity to the public during a public speech. And it was broadcasted all over the news on every single channel. And he takes off his mask in front of everybody and he says, "I'm Peter Parker and I've been Spider-Man since I was 15 years old." So now that everybody knows who Peter Parker is, the best thing that the enemies can do to hurt him is to go after his family or to go after him, because now they all know where he lives and whatnot. So Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, takes advantage of this and he orders an assassination hit on Peter. Peter, Aunt May, and Mary Jane are at Aunt May's house just reminiscing about Uncle Ben. And Aunt May gets shot in the stomach through the window, and that shot was intended for Peter Parker. She loses a lot of blood, she goes into a coma, and when they get to the hospital, MJ tells Peter that she needs a blood transfusion, so he does it. He gives his blood to Aunt May. However, later they find out that the blood transfusion isn't working because I think Aunt May developed antibodies or something to fight off his blood. So he gets pretty pissed off about this. At this point, Peter has his black symbiote suit, and so he leaves the hospital, and at this point, Kingpin is in prison, and I think he's at Rikers Island, which is like a high security prison for supervillains or just petty criminals with like a bigger, with bigger crimes on their record. And he gets to Rikers Island, and the Kingpin sees him. I think all the prisoners are out on the courtyard in the prison. Wilson Fisk sees Spider-Man arrive at the prison, and the Kingpin antagonizes Peter by calling him a chump and that he's a failure to his family. Peter gets pissed about this. He rips his suit off, and he just fights in his underwear, I think. He jumps down to the courtyard, and he's like, "I'm going to kick your ass." So he beats the shit out of Kingpin in front of everybody. All of the prisoners saw Kingpin get his ass whooped. Kingpin gets beat so bad that he can't even stand, and he's just a bloody pulp. Peter then grabs him, and he tells the Kingpin, "You know, all I have to do to kill you is I can shoot my webs down your throat into your internal organs and you can suffer to death. But I'm going to give you something that's worse than death. And that's letting everybody know that you are beatable, that I beat you one-on-one, man-to-man, and that you are not as unbeatable as you thought you were. And just so you know, if you ever escape Rikers Island, I will be waiting for you, and I will fucking kill you." So then Spider-Man leaves, and I think he goes back to the hospital to go see Aunt May. So jumping back into Spider-Man No Way Home, losing Aunt May really was something that I didn't see coming because we already lost Uncle Ben. We never saw it in the MCU. So we thought that that was really the only loss that Peter Parker would have when it comes to his family. But then Aunt May also dies too, which is something that we don't really see too often, where Peter Parker lost both Uncle Ben and Aunt May. And the importance of losing Aunt May in this movie is that right before she succumbs to her wounds, she tells Peter that they did the right thing. And with great power comes great responsibility. I was not expecting to hear this quote in this movie. And that quote, every single Spider-Man fan knows where that quote comes from. And it comes from Uncle Ben in the comic books. And the significance of this quote is that it defines who Peter Parker is and who Spider-Man is. It molds him into who he becomes. And, it's a moral lesson that he carries with him forever. Initially, this quote was said by Uncle Ben. And Uncle Ben learns this lesson in the 1940s when Uncle Ben's superhero friend, Keen Marlowe, aka the Destroyer, went on a stroll with his wife Lenora. When they witnessed an active robbery attempt, Keen Marlowe activates his super soldier powers and attacks the robbers. However, when they fire their guns at him, they accidentally shoot his wife Lenora. When Uncle Ben learned of this, he knew that with great power comes great responsibility. You have a great duty to help those that need it and to use your powers for the greater good, but you must also be aware that your actions have consequences. And as long as these characters have been around, the quote wasn't said by Uncle Ben directly until 2002, pretty recent, in Volume 2, number 38 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Another thing worth noting about No Way Home is, guys, I love this, the redemption of Dr. Otto Octavius. That was so cool to see, guys, to see him become the good guy again. I mean, Dr. Otto Octavius, he has always been a good guy who tried to use his knowledge for the greater good until the arms that he created corrupted him and really took over his mind. Something that Dr. Otto says in 2004's Spider-Man 2 is, intelligence is not a privilege, it's a gift, and you use it for the good of mankind. And that's really what Dr. Otto tried to do. Peter seeing Otto again, and seeing Otto hold the arc reactor. He's holding it and he says, "The power of the sun." Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man swings in and finishes the sentence for him. "In the palm of your hand." And this is in reference to his fusion reactor in Spider-Man 2. It was a tritium-powered energy generator that mimicked the power of the sun and was to serve as a source of unlimited renewable energy. This quote is from Dr. Otto when he is working on his fusion reactor and he's looking at it. And he has like those little sunglasses to protect his eyes from the little mini sun that he created. And he says, "The power of the sun in the palm of my hand." And I think that was during the demonstration that he was doing where Harry Osborn was there along with his wife, and Peter Parker was also invited to go there too. So that was really nice to see that this movie paid homage to a lot of the older movies. And that was a really sweet twist. So continuing with them reuniting again, Dr. Otto says, "You're all grown up. How are you?" And Peter Parker says, "Trying to do better." And that's an homage to Spider-Man 2 again, when Otto and Peter first meet and they're having lunch together. And Otto's wife is there too, and she made the lunch for them. Otto says to Peter that Dr. Connor calls Peter brilliant but lazy. Peter replies by saying, "I'm trying to do better." And that was a really heartwarming man, that was a really heartwarming moment. Like, it threw me back to my childhood so much. And I've watched these movies so many times that I remember a lot of these quotes, but I didn't think that I would ever hear them again like this. No one did. Another quote that pays tribute to one of the older Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies is when Willem Dafoe's character Green Goblin is locked up in Doctor Strange's like prison, and they're talking about how they can help each other so that the villains don't end up dying like they did in their own respective universe. And the Green Goblin says, "I'm something of a scientist myself." And that quote has become a huge internet meme. You have like memes that says, "I'm something of a mechanic myself," or "I'm something of a doctor myself." With, of course, there's more context to it, but people would use that meme. And so that is from Spider-Man 1, when Harry Osborn introduces Peter Parker to his father, Norman Osborn. So that is where that's from, and I thought that was pretty cool. One of the things that I really loved about this movie was that it was so funny. The jokes were hilarious. Ned saying that he won't turn into a villain on Tom Holland's Peter Parker, and like the irony of it. So if you guys didn't know, Ned in the comic books actually becomes the Hobgoblin, and that's why it was so funny. Ned talking to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and asking him if he had a best friend, and Tobey Maguire says, "I did, and he died in my arms right after he tried to kill me." And Ned's just looking at him like, "God damn, that's deep." And then that's when he goes over to Tom Holland's Spider-Man and says that he will never turn into a bad guy on him. The 3 Spider-Mans talking about how they shoot their webs. That was super funny, because Tobey Maguire asks Tom Holland, he's like, "What are you doing?" Tom Holland says, "Oh, I'm just refilling my web shooters. I'm having like a web block right now." Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man proceeds to shoot webs out of his shoulder, his wrists, onto like whatever the heck it was that was in the lab. And later on in the movie, they ask him like, "Do your webs come out of anywhere else?" And Tobey Maguire's like, "No, just my wrists." Another thing that I loved, oh my god, the meme culture is so amazing. Like, the 3 Spider-Mans pointing at each other in the science lab, that was like top tier meme, like comedy right there, because that has been a meme for the longest time on the internet, and they finally made it come true in this Spider-Man movie. That was freaking awesome to see. The Avengers joke too, oh my god. When the 3 Spider-Mans are trying to figure out how to defeat the villains, and they all get together on the Statue of Liberty, and they're on like the scaffolding, and they're trying to figure out how to work as a team. And Tom Holland Spider-Man says, "Look, I've been in a team. I don't want to brag, but I've been in the Avengers." Tobey Maguire Spider-Man goes, "The Avengers? That's great. What is that?" that was so freaking funny. And Andrew Garfield's his Spider-Man's like, "Is that a band? Are you in a band?" So yeah, I mean, guys, just the top tier comedy in here, that was really awesome to see, and I think everybody really enjoyed that. But getting into the most important part of this movie, seeing the Spider-Mans all come together in a live action movie. Everybody has been waiting for it for the longest time, and we've seen it in a lot of the cartoon shows, like we have the movie into the Spider-Verse, and then you have a lot of different crossovers on like the Spider-Man TV shows and stuff like that. But never have we seen, like, I never expected to ever see all three of them come together in one live action movie. They are my childhood. Well, Tobey Maguire is my childhood. He has a special place in my heart. Which reminds me, like when the first Spider-Man movie came out in 2001, I think, or it might have been 2002. I was like 6 or 7 years old. The CGI tech at that time for the first movie, like we were at a point in time in technology to where we can make Spider-Man look like a real swinging superhero in a movie. And I think they did an amazing job. And it was so believable. And just being able to be immersed into that kind of like cinematic universe to where you're looking at them, you're like, wow, this looks incredibly real. It's not like the crappy 1970s Spider-Man where his suit looks like a $3 suit that he bought off of Wish.com, and he can't even swing like a real Spider-Man. You know, he's like walking on ropes that don't even look like spider webs. That was incredibly funny. Like, if you guys have the chance to see that on YouTube, I would type that in 1970s Spider-Man. Or was it the 80s? Might have been the 80s too, so I could be wrong. So Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, he is the GOAT. Like, he is my go-to Spider-Man. He didn't crack a lot of jokes as Spider-Man normally would in the comic books, but I think he had a very strong foundation, and he was a very strong character in his own right as Peter Parker and also as Spider-Man, even if he wasn't 100% comic accurate. And that was really lovable about him. He was, you know, truly his own iteration of Spider-Man. You know, and the thing that was pretty accurate compared to the comics was that Tobey's Spider-Man, he was a dorky, nerdy dude with an average face, but the body and strength of a superhero. That's Peter Parker. He's a dorky dude. He looks like a nerd, but you ever see him? He's like ripped, and obviously he has the strength of a spider. He follows a moral code, and the only time that he ever breaks his moral code in his iteration of Spider-Man is when the symbiote suit takes over him. And that's completely understandable because the symbiote suit really feeds on your emotions. He is also the main moral compass for Tom Holland's Spider-Man, especially from stopping him from killing the Green Goblin. Tobey Spider-Man knows best that killing your enemies doesn't make you feel better. In fact, it makes you feel worse. And going back to the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. You have all this power in your hands, but you have to be mindful of what that power can do, and that whatever you do with your powers, there's always going to be a consequence for it. Tobey Spider-Man knows this better than any of the other two Spider-Mans. When I saw Tobey Maguire jump in and stop the glider from killing the Green Goblin, seeing Tom Holland's Spider-Man struggle so hard to push past Tobey's Spider-Man was like the greatest thing ever. I'm like, dude, look at the GOAT. Look how freaking strong he is. And if you look at his face, it doesn't even look like he's trying his hardest to restrain Tom Holland's Spider-Man from killing the Green Goblin. Like, he's just sitting there holding his arms up, holding onto the glider, like, bro, chill. Just chill. Like, it ain't worth it. That was awesome to see. So moving forward with Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker, he had a really cocky attitude, and he did not look like a Peter Parker to me. Dude looked like a preppy kid with fancy hair who wouldn't get bullied at school. Like, if you looked at Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, you're not like you won't take a look at him and be like, yeah, he gets bullied at school all the time, you know? He didn't look like a nerd at all, like how he's supposed to. He wasn't a dork like he is in the comic books. So he just wasn't the best Peter Parker for me. He was an okay Spider-Man with his jokes and antics. Like, this is really first like real version that we've seen of Spider-Man in a live movie where he actually does a lot of joking, and he really tries to like antagonize with his enemies with his jokes. We didn't really get to see that with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and that's okay because he's still the GOAT, so I forgive him. But yeah, he was, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was okay. The first suit looked like ass. I don't know how that made it to final production, but whoever designed that suit needs to get fired. Like, I understand where they were coming from when they made the first suit for the Amazing Spider-Man 1. I think they really wanted to go for something that was more what they thought was modern and was just kind of a different take from any of the iterations that we've seen in the past. And they did a good job at disappointing their fans, because I mean that suit looked like ugh. I don't even want to think about it. But the second suit though in Amazing Spider-Man 2, that was a really, really, really good suit. I think they drew inspiration from was it the Amazing Spider-Man comics, or was it Ultimate Spider-Man? I'm not sure, but like the big eyes that you see on Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man suit, those are straight from the comics. I forgot which Spider-Man comics it's from, but that suit looked awesome. So really loved that suit. Extremely comic accurate. And the thing about like superhero suits in modern movies is that they always try to make their suits look modern, like up to date. With some superheroes, you shouldn't really do that. With like characters like Batman and Superman, I understand why you would make the suits look different. Like, you get rid of the red underwear for Superman. I mean, what kind of freaking guy wears red underwear over his pants, right? In 2022. You're not going to see that. So it was good that they got rid of Superman's red underwear in the newest incarnation of Superman, and they gave it a really modern take. I love that suit. Batman suits, Batman suits, you can go both ways. You can give it a really modern twist with like all the gadgets and stuff and all the armor and padding, because we've seen him like that in the comic books and in the movies too, or not in the movies, but in like the cartoon movies and stuff like that, in the animations we have seen that, and also in the video games. But with Ben Affleck's Batman, they gave him a really classic look while also making us believe that suit is impenetrable. For example, when he saves Superman's mom and they shoot him right in the head with a handgun, and I'm sure it hurts from the impact, but it didn't pierce his cowl that he wears over his head. So yeah, although modern looks on superhero like armor and costumes looks great and all, and it makes it look more impenetrable and durable, sometimes just leaving it classic and looking the way it is great. But in Spider-Man's case, his suit is always getting torn up in the comics. We didn't really see that too much in Tom Holland's iteration of Spider-Man, because obviously he has Stark tech, so his suits are extremely durable. But I would have loved to see his suits get completely ripped up and destroyed, and we didn't really get to get the chance to really see that. But going back to like modernizing Peter Parker's Spider-Man suit, these are one of those suits where I think you can really leave it the way that it is with just the traditional classic look, and it'll still look phenomenal. A great example was Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. He had an extremely classic look on his suit in the second movie. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man had a pretty classic suit too. It gave it more of a modern look with the spider webs. So like, if you look at the webbings on Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man suit, it's like, how do you say it? It's like 3D, right? Like it's like overlaying the bottom layer of his suit, and it gives it a little bit of texture. So I think at that time it gave it a little bit more of a modern look. But with Tom Holland's Spider-Man suit and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man suit, they're very the suits are very streamlined, and the webs on their suits, like it's not very thick like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, like very, very classic look, and I love that. So with Tom Holland Spider-Man, the thing that I didn't like was the Stark Tech suit. I wasn't a big fan of that. Yeah, it looked freaking awesome, but that's not the Spider-Man that I know. He wasn't the kind of guy to just accept technology from Tony Stark and be like, oh, look at me, I'm so cool and stuff. Because the thing about Peter Parker is that he's smart as shit in the comics. He has the ability to make all of this technology by himself, and we've seen that time and time again in the comic books. So I don't know why they would introduce Stark Tech to all of his Spider-Man suits like that, when he completely has the capability to do that himself. Maybe it was because Spider-Man is supposed to be like 15 or 16 years old in the MCU. I'm not too sure about that, but yeah, that's just me. I didn't really like the Tony Stark tech in Tom Holland Spider-Man suits. Just wasn't a fan of it, because that's not the Spider-Man that I fell in love with. So I wanted to talk about one of the biggest things to happen in this movie, and that is Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man redeeming himself. That was such a huge moment, and it really took everyone by surprise. No Way Home was a way to redeem his character after his failure to save Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In No Way Home, MJ falls just the way Gwen falls, but this time Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was quick enough to save her in the nick of time. This save was a grim reminder of his failure, but a form of redemption. He couldn't save the love of his life in his own universe, but he was able to do it for his counterpart in this universe to ensure that Tom Holland's Spider-Man didn't meet the same fate. Like, he truly went above and beyond to make sure that Tom Spider-Man didn't stray from his righteous path as Spider-Man and also become bitter just as he did. So when we go back earlier in the movie before this happens, when all the Peters meet each other for the first time, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man says, I couldn't save Gwen. She was my MJ. And I'm never going to be able to forgive myself for that. After she died, I stopped pulling my punches and I became bitter. I just don't want you to end up like me. And Andrew Garfield, he stayed true to his word, and he did exactly what he said. He tried his very best, and he executed it very well, to make sure that Tom Holland's Spider-Man didn't become the way that he did. And, I mean, that sequence, this story, guys, oh my god, I can't even explain it. It's so good. Round of applause, honestly. One thing that I did want to see in this movie was when all of these Spider-Mans were in the science lab together, and Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire were working on their own respective things, and they're talking about their love life. Tobey asks Andrew if he's ever had time to find love again, and Andrew says, no, just really don't have time because of the superhero business and all that stuff, And he asks Tobey, what about you? You got a girl? Tobey Maguire says, yeah, but it's a little complicated, but we're working on it. Oh man, I was so disappointed. I was hoping that Tobey would say that him and Mary Jane Watson got married and had kids. Because I'm like, bro, you guys are still working stuff out? Like, you're so old. Like, come on. Like, what have you guys been doing for the past, 15 years? Like, come on. So I was really hoping to have a story about that, about, what would happen after Spider-Man 3, after he defeated Venom and forgave Sandman. So hopefully we get a Spider-Man 4 to where we can see that happen. But an interesting fact about that, about why that wasn't included in the movie, because I think it was brought up, like they wanted Tobey to have like a kid and stuff like that and be married to Mary Jane Watson. But Tobey Maguire actually said, I don't want that at all for my character. I kind of forgot like why he said that, but Tobey Maguire didn't want that for his Spider-Man. So, okay, that's cool. The GOAT said it, so it shall be. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is Tom Holland's Spider-Man no longer being Iron Boy Jr. So like everybody calls him Iron Boy Jr. because it became a huge meme on the internet and people make fun of him for that. And the reason why people call him Iron Boy Jr. is because he has all this Stark technology and he's living in Tony Stark's shadow and looked up to him as a father figure and as a leader and as an example of how to be a superhero. So everything that Peter Parker became in the MCU Spider-Man, it was because he followed Iron Man. So in No Way Home, the story really allowed his Peter Parker to step out of Tony Stark's shadow and having everybody forget who Peter Parker is. He is truly all alone now, just like how he is in the comic books. He's living alone, he's broke as fuck, and he lives in a shitty rundown apartment, just like how he does in the comic books, and how Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was too. He's starting all over again. So this is almost like a really, really soft reboot to the MCU's version of Spider-Man. And I absolutely love that. I'm all for it. Like, give me the cake. I'm gonna eat it, man. That's what we've all wanted to see. Because for the longest time, the MCU version of Spider-Man, he was ruined. He wasn't the Spider-Man that we all fell in love with. He's not the Spider-Man that we know. So with this fresh start and everybody completely forgetting who Peter Parker is, they remember who Spider-Man is, but just not his true identity. That was a really nice breath of fresh air. And guys, his new suit, super comic accurate. This is what I've been waiting for the longest time. A homemade Spider-Man suit that looks like the comic book suit made by Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I think a lot of people can say that they've been waiting for this suit, and oh my goodness, it looks so beautiful. We don't really get to see this suit for a long time in the movie. In the final swing sequence, you only see his suit for like maybe a minute or so. But in that minute, it just looked, oh man, I can't even say, it just looks great. It really does. And I'm really excited to see this Spider-Man suit in action in the next Spider-Man trilogy. So it has been confirmed that Tom Holland has signed on for another Spider-Man trilogy. And this is really exciting because I want to see Tom Holland's Spider-Man go to college and getting to know MJ and Ned again. And this time with Ned, I really truly think that Ned's going to become the Hobgoblin and they're going to duke it out. And I think how Peter will save his friend is through words. Like they're going to be having their final battle in the movie, and then Peter's going to be like, hey, I know this about you. And Ned's going to be like, how the hell do you know that? And Peter's going to be like, we used to be friends, bro. I also know this about you. And then Ned's going to have like a giant brain explosion. He's gonna go good again. So that's how I think it's going to end up being in the next Spider-Man trilogy. So super excited to see that, and I can't wait to see more Spider-Man content throughout the years. Alright guys, this brings us to the conclusion of this episode of the Let's Slam podcast. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and thank you to all of my subscribers. You guys are truly the best. I know I'm not the best right now at doing my podcast, but I practice a lot and I try really hard to be a better version of myself than who I was yesterday. So definitely want to get up there and give you guys some really good content. If there's anything that I need to improve on, please let me know in the comment section below or on Facebook if you have me on Facebook. Alright guys, I will see you guys again on the Let's Slam podcast.